Duro golpe. Mike Pence critica a Trump y expone su debilidad. Señores, el ex vicepresidente Mike Pence ha vuelto en escena. En esta ocasión, en una entrevista en CNN con Jake Tapper, para poder hablar sobre la humillante y absurda cumbre que hubo entre Donald Trump y Vladimir Putin en Alaska. Lo dejó muy claro. Putin no es alguien en quien confiar. Y lo que Estados Unidos necesita es una postura mucho más dura contra él. Aunque bueno, pudimos notar que Mike Pence midió sus palabras, obviamente, fue evidente el mensaje. Un empujón directo a Trump. Lo curioso es que ya no hay vuelta atrás, porque como bien sabemos, la relación entre Trump y Pence ha estado rota desde que el ex vicepresidente se negó a ser el cómplice activo en el intento de robar las elecciones del 2020. Donald Trump lo odia, pero bueno, Mike Pence ahora lo critica sin tapujos. Escuchemos esto.
Thought President Trump was beginning to realize, quote, Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. Vladimir Putin wants Ukraine, unquote. As you noted, there was no ceasefire agreed to. President Trump seemed to indicate before the summit that had to happen, or he said there would be very severe consequences. Since the summit, he's dropped demands for an immediate ceasefire. 5 Ukrainians were killed overnight. He's telling people, you heard Witkoff say, a peace deal, a larger peace deal, can be reached quickly if Putin's demands, which include Ukraine ceding control of the entire Donbass region to Russia, are met.
Yeah, we can end this quickly if we just give Putin everything.
What do you make of all that? I mean, there are observers out there, people who like Trump, people who are rooting for Trump, who think that Trump got played.
Well, look, I served alongside the president for 4 years. I know his style in dealing with these dictators. It's the velvet glove, but I think the hammer needs to come, and it needs to come immediately. I think the president, as he welcomes President Zelensky to the Oval Office tomorrow, and a whole cast of our allies in Europe that are going to be joining him, I think at the same time he ought to pick up the phone and ask Majority Leader John Thune to immediately pass the secondary sanctions bill that is supported by virtually everyone in the United States Senate. I think the combination of engagement, but also making it clear to Putin that we are prepared to take actions that would literally break his economy, even
Yeah, Trump's not going to do that.
while we redouble our commitment to the security of Ukraine and to working closely with our European allies is important.
Ok, para los que no entendieron, Mike Pence está sugiriendo algo que Trump jamás hará, y es ponerse firme con Putin. Para ser duro con él tendrías que dejar de temerle, algo que Trump nunca ha demostrado, y sobre todo dejar de buscar desesperadamente su aprobación. Por eso Pence en esta ocasión tiene razón. Con Putin solo existe una opción, pero Trump nunca se va a atrever a tomarla. Más adelante Pence fue incluso mucho más claro porque afirmó que Putin quiere reconstruir la esfera de influencia soviética y que no se va a detener hasta conseguirlo o hasta que alguien lo frene.
I said it before, I'll say it again. In the long history of the last 25 years, Putin has made it clear. He launched an attack into Georgia when President Bush was in office. He attacked Crimea and Ukraine when Obama was in office. After that disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, he crossed the border and started this war 3 years ago. Putin's made it no secret of the fact that he wants to reassert the old Soviet sphere of influence, what we used to call the evil empire in Eastern Europe. And I think Putin only understands strength. So while the president and his diplomatic team engage in this reapproach with Putin, and there seems to be interest, in my judgment, Putin's not going to stop until he's stopped, until he understands that there's going to be enormous cost to Russia, and there's an unflagging commitment to defending Ukraine's sovereignty by the United States.
Ahí es donde está el punto. Mike Pence entendió perfectamente a Putin, pero sabe que Trump jamás va a ser el hombre que se enfrente a él. Donald Trump no tiene ni la voluntad ni el carácter. Prefiere hacer todo lo contrario. Aceptar lo que Putin diga como si fuese la verdad absoluta. Retrasar sanciones. Actuar como si Moscú marcara la línea de política exterior de Estados Unidos. Luego, en otra parte de la entrevista, Pence remató diciendo algo obvio, pero es algo poderoso. Y la violencia puede terminar mañana mismo, si es que Putin decide detenerla.
Is there any way, I mean, can you explain or do you understand at all how the summit could end without a ceasefire agreed to, and that would be acceptable? I mean, there are 5 Ukrainians who are now dead. I'm not blaming it on President Trump. It's obviously President Putin's fault. But
Right.
if the ceasefire had happened on Friday, those 5 Ukrainians would be alive.
Well, your question in the last segment was relevant. There's a way that Putin can end the violence immediately, and that's with a ceasefire, but then move to negotiations. But look, when it ended and we all watched that press conference and it was clear there was no ceasefire, I must tell you that I was not surprised. I mean, there was an agreement by President Zelensky to ceasefire back in February. Putin refused it. He's managed to delay the game. All the while, his military has continued its brutal assault on civilian populations in Ukraine. I think that's the reason why. Look, let's have the dialogue tomorrow at the White House. I'm also going to be praying that it's a productive time and a unifying time among all the leaders in the West and the president and President Zelensky. But at the same time, I've always said the United States posture on the world ought to be, one hand extended in friendship and diplomacy, and the other hand resting comfortably on the holster of the arsenal of democracy. I think Putin is only going to understand that there are going to be severe consequences, as
There are not.
the president promised, if there is no progress from here. The last thing we want to see is for Putin to use this latest delay as a reason to continue this war all the way until the winter hits and the fighting season essentially passes.
Lo cierto es que Mike Pence, a pesar de todo lo detestable que pueda hacer en otros temas, aquí está diciendo una verdad incómoda para Trump. Rusia es el agresor, Ucrania es el que se defendió, por más pasado que tengamos, por más noticias que hemos visto o escuchado. Y si Estados Unidos quiere tener algún papel serio en este conflicto en este momento, no puede ser bajo la sombra de un presidente sometido a la voluntad de Vladimir Putin. El problema es que Trump jamás va a ser ese presidente, porque en lugar de ser un líder, se ha convertido en el fanático número 1 de Putin. Y en el mundo donde la democracia y la seguridad internacional está en juego, pues tener a alguien así en la Casa Blanca no solo es un riesgo. Eso, amigos, es una amenaza directa. Ahora bien, Trump ha intentado correr, ha intentado, digamos que, esconderse. Pero simplemente no funciona. Cada intento que está haciendo por querer encubrir un escándalo o tapar un error, termina explotándole en la cara. No solo porque la verdad siempre sale a la luz, sino porque literalmente Trump ya no puede correr. Su salud está tan deteriorada que se maquilla los moretones a diario, si es que no lo han visto. Trata de ocultar sus tobillos hinchados, pero el declive cognitivo, físico y mental es demasiado evidente. Lo peor de todo es que él mismo lo sabe, por eso hace poco estalló en redes con un furioso mensaje luego de que el escándalo de salud, imposible de tapar por Caroline Leavitt ni por la Casa Blanca, se hiciera público. Vamos a entrar en los detalles. Primero quiero empezar con algo que Trump tampoco está logrando ocultar, y es el desplome político. Y esto lo dijo Adam Schiff, y lo dejó muy claro con este llamado.
Does this tit-for-tat over redistricting run the risk of undercutting Democrats' credibility in the eyes of voters?
Democrats offered the legislation in the last session to eliminate the gerrymander in every state. We supported, I think, to a person. Republicans, I think, almost to a person, maybe to a person, opposed that. It's very clear what party wants to do away with gerrymandering. But it was interesting to me when you asked J.D. Vance, hey, if your agenda is so popular, why are you trying to gerrymander Texas, a state that is already gerrymandered to elect Republicans? And he didn't try to defend the president's agenda. The president is deeply unpopular, one of the most unpopular presidents in history. His agenda is unpopular. The big ugly bill that is cutting health care for millions to fund tax cuts for rich people is historically unpopular. So of course, the only way they feel they can survive the midterms is by redrawing the lines in Texas. California is not going to stand for this. We will fight fire with fire. Don't poke the bear, and it's going to be necessary, but I hope what will come out of the end of all of this is where we should have begun, and that was with the Democratic bill to end the gerrymander in every state.
Donald Trump y J.D. Vance siguen huyendo de las preguntas más básicas. Presumen que ganaron un mandato histórico, que tienen la agenda más popular del mundo. ¿Dónde está ese mandato? La realidad es que Trump es impopular en todos los temas en los que él dice haber triunfado. Ni con los millones de dólares de Elon Musk lo han salvado de este rechazo generalizado. Y ante la falta total de este apoyo, su estrategia ahora es simple, es intimidar, es militarizar, tal y como lo está haciendo en DC, y como ahora está amenazando con hacer en Chicago. Justamente ahí entra la figura poderosa del gobernador Wes Moore, el cual no solo lo confrontó políticamente, sino que también lo expuso físicamente. Y eso, señores, lo llevó a uno de sus peores colapsos.
Something that is just purely performative, without actually focusing on these communities and these neighborhoods who believe that progress is possible and who are willing to put in the work, and we're just simply asking for Washington to be able to acknowledge it and support it.
He says you're not presidential timber at all. I imagine you disagree with that assessment?
No, I've been very clear. I'm not running for president, but it's interesting but it's interesting. The president seems to be more concerned about my future than he is about the future of the American people. And that's where I'm asking him to keep his focus. Focus on the things that actually matter right now, which is the fact that his economic policies are driving up prices on everything from electronics to the clothes that we wear to the food that we eat. Talk about the fact that he has immigration policies that are knocking out tens of thousands of jobs in the state of Maryland. Talk about the fact that you are about to kick veterans and seniors off of health care. Don't worry about my future. Worry about theirs.
Pues bueno, no se quedó callado y lo dijo claramente, que Donald Trump está en decadencia. Es más, fue mucho más allá. Lo desafió públicamente a dar una simple caminata por las calles de Baltimore. Un gesto simbólico que hizo enfurecer al presidente de 79 años, el cual respondió con un berrinche monumental en Truth Social. En lugar de aceptar la invitación, Donald Trump la calificó de provocador y desagradable. Atacó los números de criminalidad de Maryland y hasta amenazó con retirar fondos federales para la reconstrucción del puente Francis Scott Key, el cual colapsó el año pasado. Como si eso no bastara, también lanzó un ataque personal contra Moore, diciendo que había mentido sobre su condecoración militar, cuando en realidad recibió la estrella de bronce en 2024. Bueno, la respuesta por parte de Moore fue letal. Lo llamó President Von Spurs, recordando cómo Trump evitó el servicio militar y le ofreció un golf cart para que al menos pudiera moverse sin colapsar. Amigos, ese golpe fue preciso porque no solo es un chiste. En el año 2017, durante la cumbre del G7 en Italia, mientras otros líderes caminaron juntos en un acto oficial, Donald Trump tuvo el coraje de pedir un carrito de golf para no recorrer unos pocos metros. Pues bueno, el mensaje de Moore fue claro: Trump no puede ni siquiera caminar sin mostrar su deterioro físico. Por más maquillaje, por más encubrimientos, ya no puede esconder su decadencia, ni en lo físico ni en lo cognitivo. Y mientras J.D. Vance sonríe y los MAGA intentan aplaudirlo, lo cierto es que esta escena los tiene en pánico, porque las nuevas figuras demócratas, los jóvenes con energía, y eso, ¿no?, que hasta personas mayores como Bernie Sanders, no solo lo están enfrentando en el terreno político, sino que también lo están exponiendo en todo lo que vemos. Que Donald Trump es un hombre agotado, debilitado y totalmente incapaz de liderar.
Almost the last year, and I'm hearing a lot of the same things from an audience that has Democrats, Republicans, people who are completely disaffected with the system, and everybody in between. Afterwards, we always go out and do a rope line, talk with people one-on-one, and I hear the same things. Look, people are pissed off, they're fed up, but I'm always very interested in the conversations with people who had voted for Trump or people who are Republicans, because they're really starting, and they've been waking up for the last many months, right? From the big ugly
They're coming
bill.
to your rallies. Were they there yesterday in Omaha?
Yes. Oh, yeah. These rallies have both Democrats and Republicans at all of them. Usually they lean a little bit more Democratic, obviously.
You're just so good.
Yeah, they lean a little, but we still have Republicans coming out to them. But usually they don't answer. They don't raise their hands to ask a question during the actual town hall. That's why I always insist. Let me go out to the audience. Let me talk with people. And that's when I start meeting the people who are I voted for Trump, quietly, voted for Trump, or I'm a registered Republican, but I voted for, Kamala. And so that's where you really start to see what the crowd is like. The questions are really important, but, not everyone has is going to raise their hand and ask a question in front of 2,000 people. And yeah, that's the case at every single one of these town halls. And that's what's really exciting to me, because when I ask them, why'd you show up? Most of the time they say it's because I was curious. I'm curious about what's going on. I'm curious. And I think it's really important for Democrats to realize that we have an opening here, but let's not assume that on their own, because Donald Trump is horrible, people are just going to go, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. Let me put on my Democratic hat. We have to go out there and speak to people and connect the dots for them and give them, say, look, we know you don't like the Republican Party. That doesn't necessarily mean you like the Democratic Party off the bat, unless we knock on your door, unless we call you, unless we host events in your district and speak with you directly about what's messed up, but almost more importantly, what we're going to do to fix it.
That opportunity you're talking about, I want to show this Pew Research Center poll on the Big Beautiful Now law. 32% approve, 46% disapprove, 23% say they're not sure. So there's that opportunity you're talking about. And the opportunity that the administration is taking is not sending Donald Trump out. They're sending Vice President J.D. Vance. I'm going to play some sound from his visit in Georgia from earlier this week.
If you're working hard every single day right here in the United States, or if you're building a business right here in the United States, you ought to have a tax code that rewards you instead of punishes you. And that's what happened when we passed the Working Families Tax Cut.
Now, I don't need you to fact check, and we all know that's not what happened when they passed this new bill. But what I guess my question is, when he travels, is going to get headlines, right? The front pages of the local newspapers, if they're there, are going to have his visit. The local news is going to carry it, for days and days. He has a traveling press with him. How do Democrats find a way to do the same thing, create that same kind of interest and ability to gain headlines in this attention economy that we currently have?
Well, I'd say two things. Number one, I'm not going to sit here and say I get as many headlines as the Vice President of the United States, but when we do these town halls,
you get more of the weekend showings. How about that?
Yeah, we get the weekend showings. Well, when we go to these town halls, it dominates the local news the next day. It is all over those local news stations. And so across the country, not everyone might not see that coverage because it's hyper local. But I'll tell you, when I go to these districts, I am doing interviews with a stream of just local cameras, local people. So that's the cable and broadcast. And then the other part of it that's really important is obviously trying to meet people where they're at. We know more people are getting their news from social media. So we're working at speaking with creators and people that are local to that community. Oftentimes, especially in politics, people are like, we want to talk with the podcasters, we want to talk with the influencers, get us the most famous people you can get. And the fact of the matter is, you have people across this country that are local influencers to their local community, that they might not have as many followers, but damn it, every single follower they have lives in that place, and that's the place we're trying to get votes and talk to people. So, these are the different ways we can do that, but going there is so important. I would not be on the local news of Omaha, Nebraska, or the local news of Wichita, Kansas, really, unless I'm going to that place and giving an opportunity to speak directly to those reporters, directly to those cameras. So I'm not saying we get the same amount of news, but we get a lot when we go, when we show up, and we need to show up.
Congressman Frost, let me switch gears ever so slightly and talk about Epstein. You're a member, the Jeffrey Epstein case. You're a member of the House Oversight Committee. Your fellow Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Ro Khanna, was on the show yesterday and said that only 3% of the latest files contained new information. I would love your thoughts on that. But also, when you're in these red districts, do folks talk about the Epstein case at all?
Yeah, in fact, yesterday, one of the questions had to do with Epstein when we were in the town hall portion. And then usually when I get off stage, people will ask me about it. And here's the thing, there's people who really know a lot about what's going on with Epstein. There's people who don't know a lot, but they kind of understand. And the story is very simple. It's like everything else that's been going on during this administration. It's the ultra wealthy, the elite, the billionaires, the corporations getting away with things, having a different kind of tier of justice and not facing accountability. And whether you're Democrat or Republican or don't care about politics, that's something we are very familiar with as Americans. That's a very familiar thing. The rich, the elites getting away with things and not being held to account like it's been done for generations in this country. And Donald Trump is no different. And no matter what the hell he says, it's the same as it's always been. And that message for me, when I speak with people, really carries. Sometimes we try to over-explain things. Sometimes we try to add more dots than there are to connect. The dots are right there, and this is a very familiar thing with people. And I feel like, especially as Democrats, we have the most popular agenda, and what we have to do is just kind of explain that to people. And when you explain it in a way that feels familiar for folks, they feel like, I connected the dots myself. I'm seeing what's going on myself, and that makes more of a lifelong voter than, someone that you're just trying to score political points with in a conversation. I'm never under the illusion. I think, I put myself back when I was knocking doors every day as a field organizer. I still knock doors, but when it was my job.
Pues ahí lo tienen, señores, y se los dejo a sus propias conclusiones. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, déjame tu like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete a nuestro canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.